Okay. Anytime that you see it's ready to go, you can go ahead, Kyle. It looks like it's live to me.
Yeah, well, I pull up actual YouTube to see
Okay.
if people are on yet.
Okay.
If you're teaching a class and no one's there to hear it, did it actually happen?
Well, it's some of the best classes I teach. Nobody's listening.
Yeah, it is live now. I'm just waiting on a few more to join. All right, if you're just joining us, we're starting in Exodus chapter 20, and we'll start reading from verse 1 there in just a minute. All right, I'm seeing a few people on, so we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay.
We're
Go
starting.
ahead.
Okay, yeah, we're starting to read in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 1. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God has given you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. Now all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightning flashes, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off. Then they said to Moses, You speak with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die. And Moses said to the people, Do not fear, for God has come to test you, and that his fear may be before you, so that you may not sin. So the people stood afar off, but Moses drew the thick darkness where God was. Then the Lord said to Moses, Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, You have seen that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make anything to be with me. Gods of silver or gods of gold you shall not make for yourselves. An altar of earth you shall make for me, and you shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I record my name, I will come to you, and I will bless you. And if you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stone, for if you use your tool on it, you have profaned it. Nor shall you go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness may not be exposed on it.
So we have here the giving of the law, and specifically we're looking at the Ten Commandment law. Notice how God reminds them once again how he brought them up out of the land of Egypt. And I think it's because that was such a marvelous experience. I mean, if anything ever demonstrated the presence and the power of God, it was what we observed as we looked at the plagues. And then we looked at the parting of the Red Sea and the destruction of Pharaoh's army. And so God demonstrated his might to the Hebrew people, to the Egyptians, and we'll see later that all the world was aware of what had happened, and it put fear into them. But God was glorified, even though Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he just reminds them of that. And you shall have no gods before me. Anybody want to make a comment up to this point? Notice that you shall have no gods before me. And I've tried years ago to look in the New Testament, and really a lot of times there's more than one verse or more than one passage that will refer back to the Ten Commandments. And what I'm trying to say is, are the Ten Commandments, are they in effect today? Well, not as such, not as 10 commandments, because we're not under the law of Moses. We're under the law of Christ, or the gospel of Christ. But we're going to see that most of those commands were reinstated. And I heard it said a long time ago, and I think this is a very valid argument and even an explanation. And that is that, we've got some of the same laws here in the United States that the British had. The original colonies along the East Coast, and even some of the same laws that the Native Americans had even before that. But we are not under British law. We're under American law, and we see here that a lot of these commandments, contrary to what a lot of people think, we're not under the Ten Commandment law, but we have many of these reinstated. Ephesians chapter 4, Ephesians 4 and verse 6 says, there's one God, Father of all, who is above all, through all, and in you all. And there may be better passages than that, or some that are even maybe closely worded, but I thought that was a fairly good one. Any comments? This doesn't right at this point, doesn't lend itself to comments as well as some things we've studied. It will shortly. Go ahead.
There's definitely an emphasis in those first few verses all the way up through at least verse 7. I mean, maybe you could say through verse 11, of all of the different respect that they needed to have for God before it got to the respect they needed to have for each other. You see from verse 12 on, there's kind of respect for each other with your father and mother. Don't murder each other. Don't commit adultery against each other. Don't steal, bear false witness. There's kind of those interpersonal relationships there. But that 1 through 11, he's definitely emphasizing that, the most important thing here is that you fear me and respect me for all that I've done for you. And on the flip side of that, what I could do to you if you don't, in verse 5, where he said, I'm a jealous God that visits iniquity on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. So I think there's a reason that he puts that first before the others. Yeah.
Anytime you want to speak up, Marshall, of course, Tino knows that feel free to interrupt us. We're not considering that rude. I think it makes for a better class when we do. I think what Kyle just said backs up. It backs up what I see revealed here in the scriptures as God is saying, I want you to remember what I've just done for you. I want you to remember the plagues. I want you to remember Egypt. I want you to remember the Red Sea. Now, having said that, I showed you there is no God. The gods of Egypt were nothing. And now I want you to remember this. I want you to have no gods before me. Idol worship is not going to be tolerated. Don't make images that are created in the image of things that I myself have created. Don't do that.
Hey, Rob, let me jump in here if you don't mind. You did offer, right? So, I think it's interesting to note that that Exodus and actually going through Leviticus and Numbers as continuations of what we see in Exodus. The beginning here in chapter 20 going through the rest of Exodus, going into Leviticus, and going into Numbers, is actually stylized after ancient treaties. They're called the suzerain vassal treaties, where you have a suzerain or a conquering nation, a conquering king, and the treaty that he makes with the nation that he's conquered. And there are elements of that in Exodus here, and Deuteronomy is especially stylized after that. The entire book of Deuteronomy is in that style of a suzerain vassal treaty. And you were talking about, both of you and Kyle made comments about the first, or the second verse rather, verse 2, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. That was one of the most common, or the beginning parts of that treaty. It was a reminder of, look, this is what I've done, and this is what I'm doing for you. And, as a result of this, then we're going to set out some expectations, since I am the one that is the authority here. This is what I have done, and I am offering you a certain way of life based upon what I have done for you. Here's what I expect of you. And the very first one is, you shall have no other gods before me, as you said, harkens back to their time in Egypt, because they had seen that idolatry. They had lived under it, and they had lived in it for hundreds of years. And as we all know, and you probably covered this in your previous classes, is that those 10 plagues were a direct confrontation with those Egyptian gods. And so God has established himself as the authority, as the power, and he is taking this nation upon himself and for himself. And so he's laying out, this is the way it's going to be if we're going to have this covenant relationship. In Exodus 20, going through, like I said, the next several books is all about that covenant with his people.
The difference between following Jehovah God, between following him and following the idols, is that there's a great expectation. You can be rather lazy and serve idols, but I think the same is true today. It's one thing to be religious, and it's one thing to be religious and follow the God of heaven, because God does expect us to be holy. And you're right. He's laying down what he requires, what he is expecting as the one who did the delivering and demonstrated his greatness.
And so it makes sense that the first few commandments have to do with their relationship with him. And then, like Kyle said, it goes into the relationships with others at that point.
But verse 6, but showing steadfast love to thousands. He after mentioning that visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. I looked at a passage when I saw that visiting the iniquity of the third and fourth generation. It sounds very harsh, and almost sounds like, and sometimes innocents do suffer, and it is consequences of sin causes innocent people to suffer all the time. But there's a passage in Jeremiah chapter 16, beginning in verse 10, and look how this. I think this explains, it gives a little information that is pertinent to what we're looking at here in the book of Exodus. And here's Genesis 16:10. And when you tell his people all these words, and they say to you, why has the Lord pronounced all this great evil against us? God's people say. He says, what is our iniquity? What is the sin that we have committed against the Lord our God? And you shall say to them, because your fathers have forsaken me, declares the Lord, and they've gone after other gods and have served and worshiped them and have forsaken me and have not kept my law. And because you have done worse than your fathers, for behold, every one of you follows his stubborn evil will, refusing to listen to me. What I want you to notice there is that you have done even worse than your fathers. He visits this. He visits to the third and fourth generations. Well, why? because they prove it proves that idolatry is so contagious. It's such an attractive religion. I think that the very lascivious nature of it just attracts men in general. And the children were maybe not as innocent as you might think up front, because they were following the same course their parents took. And in the case of this passage in Jeremiah and verse 16, 12, it says, and you have done worse than your fathers. So, there's consequences of sin, and we see that here in Exodus chapter 20. And I think one of the consequences of sin is that it sets the next generation up to fall as well. Tino, Kyle?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think it's pointed out by all of you, all three of you, that God is setting his covenant with his people, and he began with a vertical relationship, commandments. That is relationship between his people and himself. And then the rest of it is relationship between man and man. But I'll go back to the question that you asked. Do we still follow these commandments? Well, if you look back in his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus actually quoted, right, part of these commandments. And he elevated these commandments, such as murder. If you think in your heart, adultery, if you think in your heart, you've already committed those, right? But, and I know we'll cover this, but let me fast forward. I know that these commandments, somebody can look at it and say, these are all external check marks for individuals under the old law. But look at the last commandment. It is the inner being of the individual that is in question right here. You should not covet, right? And that is your feeling. It's not external, but it's what's hidden that nobody can see. It's the internal person. So even though we kind of look at the Old Testament and the old law, the law of Moses, as check marks and very external, there's some internal component as well. And I think the best analogy that I can think of is, yes, it is used as a mirror to show me where the dirt is on my body, right? But the soap is Christ. It's leading me to Christ. So yes, it is external, but there's an internal component in there that we often overlook. I hope that makes sense.
Well,
it makes a lot of sense. Go ahead, Marshall.
I was going to say, Tino, verse 6, showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. That's not just external, is it?
Mm-hmm.
They have internalized it, and there is a relationship there.
No, not at all.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see
Yes.
Did I interrupt you, Tino?
No, I'm hearing some echo from somewhere.
Verse 7 then says, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. So taking the name of God in vain, vanity, if the word vanity, of course, brings to mind something which is empty or has no purpose. And, that's why I think it's wrong to the way that God is used, the name God is used rather flippantly. It's used, and I have a problem with that, because I think that anytime that we use God, we have a reference to God in any way, we need to realize how great and majestic and holy and righteous a being he is. There are some very conservative scholars that say that while this is a term that is general, it also is, if it's pointing to anything specifically, it may be pointing to the fact that God's name is not to be taken in order to get around telling the truth. And they might get that from the Sermon on the Mount and the words of Jesus, where God's name or the temple was used in order to skirt and get around being honest and having integrity. And that might be right. It probably is right. But I just, when you say take God's name in vain, I've known people that can't seem to complete a sentence without cursing. That's definitely keep using God's name in vain, though it isn't spelling that out here. And then, as I said, those who use the name, they might say gosh or golly or something like that. And I even have a little problem with that. I think most of the time they don't even know what they're saying. They don't realize it stands for, that they're really talking about God. But I think we have to be careful about using such an exalted being's name in vain. Anybody else want to make a comment on that?
I would add one other thing to that. I do think that in our society, in our culture, probably the most common way of taking God's name in vain is what you have referred to. The other thing, though, that I think of is that this is a fairly broad admonition and could be violated in a number of ways. And I always think of this, and that is that we call ourselves Christians. We have taken on the name of Christ. And if we are going to say that we are Christ's people, then if we are acting in ways that are unbecoming of Christians, if we are acting in ways that do not reflect well on God and on Jesus, his son, then we are in fact in vain using that name, and we are not giving him the glory, and that does not do him the honor and justice that he deserves. I think there are multiple ways that we could take God's name in vain, and I think that's just one of them.
That reminds me of one of maybe the best, most useful Bible teacher for me was from Danville, Kentucky. And he really made that point one time. He said to call yourself a Christian and then to live like there is no God, he said, in my mind, is definitely taking the name of God in vain. And so that, what you said made me think of that statement of what he had to say about that. The next one is in verse 8. Remember the Sabbath to keep it. Remember the Sabbath day, and of course the Sabbath is the fourth. We're looking at the fourth commandment in Deuteronomy 5 and verse 15. That was a command that was given to Israel. We know it was given to Israel through Moses because that's what's happening right here. And it is the one command that is not reinstated in the New Testament. And so when I say we don't keep all of the 10 commandments, which I don't know that I necessarily said that today, but I believe that's true. This is the one. It's not reinstated. We come together on the first day of the week rather than come together on the Sabbath day. The first day of the week is the day that Christians are to use to worship and to memorialize the God of heaven.
Rob, I think it's back in Exodus 16, I believe, was the first time we were introduced to the concept of the Sabbath, when the people were supposed to gather twice as much on Friday so that they would have enough to eat for Saturday. I think that may have part of why God did that, I think, was to introduce the Israelites to that concept of the Sabbath being a day of rest. So he was trying to kind of get them used to the Sabbath being a special day to lead up to this point where now it is an official commandment. So it wasn't like this came out of nowhere for them. They were kind of introduced to that idea back in Exodus 16 when they were gathering the food every day.
The Sabbath day in the beginning, and of course I'm throwing it out there. Tino, Marshall, as well as yourself, can scrutinize this, but the Sabbath, as far as Sabbath keeping, I see nowhere where that was kept from Adam to Moses. From Adam to Moses. And the Sabbath day was not it was a day of rest. It wasn't a corporate gathering, a gathering of the people of Israel, the church of old. It was simply a day of rest. In Exodus 20, as we're looking at here, it's defined as not working on the Sabbath. God didn't work on the seventh day. And I just took notes it's been some time ago. And I've got 12 or 14 passages down here that show that it was not working. They were not to work. It wasn't that they were to come together like we do to worship God on the first day of the week. The Sabbath was a day of rest. There was not, as far as I could see in the Old Testament, there was not a day of the week that was set aside for doing so. Sacrifices later sacrifices were made daily at the tabernacle and then in the temple. It seems to me like in that sense, worship was continual, but it was just not a corporal. It was not all the people gathering together, like all the church comes together. The idea that the Sabbath is a God ordained day of corporate worship, I think is just not, it's not there. Now, that's not to say that the Sabbath wasn't set apart for that. It wasn't a good time to remember God. It was a day of rest. So therefore you had an opportunity to dwell on God, to dwell on the word of God. The New Testament does record Jews and converts meeting in synagogues on the Sabbath by the time we get into the New Testament. Again, however, that it looks to me like the Bible does not command that the Sabbath day be a day of corporate worship. What do y'all think about that? Have any thoughts?
Let me throw something out to you all to think about and see if I'm it may be off on a tangent a little bit, but yeah, when I look at the Sabbath, as you pointed out, Rob, it was for the purpose of, I guess, resting and being recharged, right? But even though it was not a formal gathering, convocation, simply, it was really designed to me in a way that not only are they resting from their busy servile work, but they are focusing on their Creator, right? I don't know if I'm missing it, but it's when you're resting and you're not so busy, now you should focus on Jehovah, on God. And even though it's not stated in the New Testament, and we don't, about a Sabbath day, do we have a Sabbath stated in the New Testament? What is our Sabbath?
Well, I know that a lot of times I hear the term that Sunday is the Christian Sabbath, but I have a problem with that. It's not really, as far as I can see, there's really nothing in the scriptures in the New Testament that would condemn someone from working on the Sabbath as long as they were able to come together on the first day of the week to break bread. And certainly not like some friends I've had, and really like I was many years ago when I was in a major denomination where, some of us thought it was sinful to go fishing on Sunday because Sunday's the Christian Sabbath. But that is, I really believe that is, as a whole, that is maybe an invention of the Catholic Church.
Yeah, in the first century, they didn't have weekends. They didn't have days off of work. They were working 7 days a week. So there's nothing wrong with working on a Sunday. But like you said, there are certain things on Sundays in the New covenant that take precedence or that need to be done when it comes to the church and your worship and so forth. But I mean, I'm glad we had weekends. That they didn't have them back then. We do.
Right. I took, you got something to say there. I thought you would probably be able to. You would probably be more familiar with this information I'm bringing up here than I am, for sure. But this comes from the Catechism, and I want you to notice it's the 10 Commandments as we have them, as I see them in the Word of God, the Bible, and as I see them in the Catechism. And now notice the first one. Are you all able to read that? That graphic the resolution isn't super. Can you read that? I hope you can.
Yeah, you can read it.
Well, notice the first commandment: you shall have no other gods before me. And they're saying you shall not have strange gods before me. That's the same. But now notice that the second commandment, you shall not make any graven image or an idol. You notice in the Catechism, it's not there. You see how that's just completely missing? Look at number 2 in the Catechism. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And then also, I want you to notice, look down at 4, at the 4th commandment. Remember the Sabbath day. Remember, the Sabbath is the 7th day. It's and the 7th day for us is Saturday. Yeah, I don't care what it's called. That's the 7th day. But notice the change that's made in the Catechism. Notice what it says. Remember to keep holy the Lord's day. Now, can you begin to understand why you have the Catholic Church and your major denominations came out of the Catholic Church? You begin to see it instead of realizing that was given to the Jews who were to have a special day of rest, the 7th day of the week, the Sabbath day. They have changed that because it suits them then to make that Sunday. Remember to keep the Lord's day, keep holy the Lord's day. There's a difference. And there's some other differences there at the bottom, but I won't get into them. But I thought those two were definitely worthy of note. Tino, you got anything?
I mean, it is correct. I remember growing up in a Catholic church, and really one of the scary things for you to do is to violate, the Sabbath Day Commandment. And even the Jews struggle with this, right? I mean, they had several rules in addition to this commandment to regulate, should you be wearing this on the Sabbath, because it may be considered labor, and should you be doing this? But in the Catholic Church, I mean, it's, whatever was laborious, you had to be very, very careful. So even now, I find myself going outside, like on Sunday, and I would panic if I reach down to pick up something, and it just, I have a flashback because it was so ingrained into me growing up. And so I'm familiar with this, but let me bring us back. Maybe I didn't state my question in a way that made sense. Could the Sabbath that was given to them be a shadow of something under the law of Christ?
Absolutely. Hebrews chapter 4 and 5. Hebrews chapter 4 and 5 makes that very clear, that there is still a rest available for us.
Yes. And it is the Sabbath, a rest in Christ, isn't it? And that's what, I appreciate that, because I thought maybe I was missing it, but I think that was a shadow of, that excellent rest that is promised.
Well, is the rest there? I mean, I've heard this both ways. I figured that rest is talking about heaven. Some say the rest is talking about the church, and I can see that. But do either one of you or either one of the three of you have a view on that? I think it is a type. I agree with the Sabbath day is a day of rest. That's an obvious that it is a figure of the rest. And yet is the rest. I think that's talking about not anything, not the church, but I think it's talking about heaven.
Oh, yeah. I mean, because the Hebrews 4, verse 9, he says, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. But he's connecting that with the land promise as well in chapters 4, or in chapters 4 of Hebrews. And so entering into that rest, and they did not have the peace that was promised, the ultimate peace, that only comes, yes, through Christ, but when? Well, ultimately, that will be heaven. That will be when we have our final rest. So yeah, that Sabbath rest is definitely heaven and not the church. I mean, while there is some, I think there's some peace, of course, by knowing you're part of God's people. I don't think that's what Hebrews 4 is talking about.
Yeah. Thank you.
In Acts 3 and verse 19 and 20, repent therefore and turn back that your sins may be blotted out, that the times of refreshing. I've heard that compared to the rest that we have in the church, but I don't know how you can dismiss the passage that Marshall referred to in the book of Hebrews that points yet to a rest that is yet to come, and it's which is obviously pointing up toward heaven. Any other comments? Kyle, you look like you're deep in thought. You're either studying your sermon or looking at what we're.
Yeah, no, whenever y'all ask these questions about what do you think about something, I feel like I'm shooting from the hip if I give an answer. So I'll let y'all answer those. Y'all have more wisdom than I do.
So we see that it was a day. It was a day of rest. I knew that. I've known that for some time, but I can remember having. I point this out from time to time. I remember a discussion with Russ and Nancy Wilshire that really brought that home to me, to make me go and look at that, just exactly what was the Sabbath day. And what they had to say just proved to be right on. It was really a day of rest. It was not a day of a corporate gathering. They under the law of Moses, they developed the three great feasts where they had to come together. That was a corporate gathering, but the Sabbath day was just it was a day of rest. And sure enough, they weren't fishing or anything like that. I agree with that. On the Sabbath day, they did not do that. And then it mentions in verse 11, in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Yes, that's what it says, and I believe that. But that does not give any kind of proof that there was a Sabbath day from Abraham on. I just haven't been able to find that anywhere. Yes, I believe there was a day of rest, and I believe that, and we can see that they're pointing back to that as Moses is giving. Remember the Sabbath day, and it even goes back and points to God resting on the seventh day. That's what we see right here in this verse. But it's we got have we got a couple minutes, Kyle, or you reckon we ought to just call it right there?
I mean, we got 3 minutes, but I mean, I don't know how much you can do with 3 minutes there. I just had one comment about the, towards the end of this chapter, when in verse 22, when the Lord said to Moses, "Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, you have seen that I have talked with you from heaven." I think there's an important distinction there that God revealed himself to the people as well. He didn't just speak to Moses and then the people just had to trust Moses. That God was kind of trying to build the Israelites' faith as well by speaking with them. And we see in verse 18 how they witnessed all of this. And then in verse 19, they said, well, "Hey, you handle the talking to God. We don't want to talk to God lest we die." So there is definite fear and respect and awe in the people when they heard God here, which does make you wonder why they so quickly built an idol later on, the golden calf. But you definitely see impressive fear of God here from the people after hearing this.
God is holy, and that
Mhm.
whole everything about that, the fear that was generated from the smoke and the thunderings and the trumpet, all of that was to make it very plain that God is not common, that He is above us in every way. And I tend to agree with you, Kyle, that they were hearing in the beginning, but it was such a fearful experience that they then chose just speak to Moses, like give the message to him, and we'll accept what he says. And that was the purpose. That was the purpose of doing it that way. God wanted there to be no doubt that He was there and that Moses wasn't making this up, but He was also perfectly content to go ahead and reveal, which it was part of His plan. There's one mediator under that old covenant, and that was, of course, Moses. With having said that, if there are no closing remarks, it's really time for me to quit sharing, let Kyle have the screen, and I really appreciate it. And Marshall, I'm sorry. There was one point there that I called on the two of them, and it wasn't because I was trying to leave you out. It's just that for a moment I forgot your name. And
Don't worry about it. No offense.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it, fellows. I really enjoyed this. Thank you very much.
thank y'all.
All right.
All right. Well, I will start the sermon here in about 2 minutes.
Thanks, guys.
Yep. Thanks.
Kyle, I don't have, do you have it now? You have control? I stopped the share on my,
I should be able to share. Just give me 1 second.
okay. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Rob. Can you mute your microphone as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, everyone. So I'm about to start here in just a minute, and I apologize if I have a internet interruption or something. If someone can text me if I do cut out or something like that, but we'll see how it goes. So what I wanted to talk about tonight is I'm just kidding. I wanted to scare everybody with this slide, say politics and the election, my thoughts, since I'm sure we've all gotten way too much of that lately. That is not what I'm talking about. Wish the sermon was in person so I could watch everybody's reaction as I do that. But yeah, tonight I want to just talk real quick about Barnabas, who is referred to in Acts chapter 4. His name was Joseph, but the apostles called him Barnabas because that means son of encouragement. So they were giving him that name because of, I'm assuming that's how he was. He was someone who encouraged. And so what I want to talk about is just a different maybe way of saying that. It's something that I see in Barnabas is Barnabas the optimist. I see, we're going to look at these soon, of how Barnabas was someone that was an optimist, saw the good in people, saw the good in situations, and hopefully, we can see in him a way that we should be ourselves. The first example is in Acts chapter 9. Seeing how Barnabas was the optimist, and we'll read that here on the screen in Acts chapter 9. And this is a situation where Paul had just been converted. He had just become a Christian, and all the other Christians had remembered that Paul had been a persecutor of the church, how he had thrown Christians in jail and overseen them being killed, and they were kind of nervous and didn't really want to accept Paul into the church because of that reputation he had. But Barnabas is the one that steps up in this situation. In Acts chapter 9, verse 26, and when he had come to Jerusalem, he attempted to join the disciples, and they were all afraid of him, for they did not believe that he was a disciple. And here's what Barnabas did. But Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles and declared to them how on the road he had seen the Lord who spoke to him, and how at Damascus he had preached boldly in the name of Jesus. Now, this is, we see throughout the rest of Acts and the rest of the letters that Paul wrote, we see what an influence Paul had on the church. And Paul has an incredible reputation to this day, and for good reason, among all Christians, for all the good work that he did. But going back to the very beginning, Paul's ministry got started, and maybe I'm sure God would have found a different way, but it was Barnabas's time here to help Paul. Barnabas is the one that stepped up, that saw the good in Paul, that believed that he had truly repented of how he had been, and that he was truly living for God, living for Christ. And Barnabas is the one that stepped up, put his neck out on the line, his reputation out on the line for Paul's sake. And so that led to Paul obviously converting hundreds or thousands of Christians on down the road and teaching others. So this one example of Barnabas being an optimist, seeing the good in someone, that it would have been very easy to see the negative in Paul. And obviously all the other Christians were doing that. They were seeing the negative in Paul. They didn't believe that he had changed. But Barnabas was the optimist. Barnabas, this son of encouragement, he was the one that saw the good in Paul and was willing to vouch for him at this time. Another example of we see Barnabas being an optimist. This is in Acts chapter 11. It says, "And the hand of the Lord was with them, and a great number who believed turned to the Lord. The report of this came to the ears of the church in Jerusalem, and they sent Barnabas to Antioch." And here's this optimist, Barnabas, seeing the good in situations, seeing how he can be positive, how he can be encouraging. The son of encouragement, the optimist, says, "When he came and saw the grace of God, he was glad, and he exhorted them all to remain faithful to the Lord with steadfast purpose." And then it describes him, "For he was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and of faith, and a great many people were added to the Lord." So this is a man that is positive. He is happy. He's thrilled with what he sees being done in the church. And he expresses that emotion. He expresses his thankfulness for the people. He encourages them, exhorts them to remain faithful. And a great many people are being added to the Lord here while he's here. So this is someone that is seeing the good in situations, that's not dwelling on the persecution that's happening in the church. He's not dwelling on the fact that maybe, Gentiles aren't a big part of the church yet. He's not dwelling on all the negatives. He's seeing the good things here, that the gospel is exploding in this area. Christians are being converted. People are being brought to Christ, and he is seeing the good in that and encouraging others as he sees that. But continuing on, not only that, but he is so optimistic and so positive about the situation. Look what he does next. "So Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul, and when he had found him, he brought him to Antioch. For a whole year, they met with the church and taught a great many people. And in Antioch, the disciples were first called Christians." So not only was he was upbeat about it, he was optimistic, he was happy about what was going on. So because of that, he wanted to tell Paul about it. He went and got Paul and brought him there to Antioch. So you see here another example of Barnabas being positive, being optimistic, seeing the good in situation, and not only seeing the good in it, but wanting others to be part of that, wanting others to share in that good news that's happening, and that good situation that's happening there at Antioch. So again, Barnabas the optimist here, showing how he saw the good in situations. One other example that we see here, and this is maybe the most interesting to me, a different way for me to look at it, is in Acts chapter 15. If you remember back in Acts chapter 12 and 13, Paul and Barnabas took with them a man called John, who is also called Mark. And he started out with them, but then sometime during that trip, he left them and went back to Jerusalem. And so then when they're ready to go out on another journey, Barnabas wants to bring Mark, and we see what happens here. "And after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, 'Let us return and visit the brothers in every city where we proclaimed the word of the Lord, and see how they are.' Now Barnabas wanted to take with them John, called Mark, but Paul thought best not to take with them one who had withdrawn from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. And there arose a sharp disagreement, so that they separated from each other. Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and departed, having been commended by the brothers to the grace of the Lord. Now, I want to start out what I say about this by saying I can't see that there was anything sinful that happened here, that someone, Barnabas or Paul, was in sin in how they approached the situation. I'll start out that way. But when I have always read this, I've always just kind of assumed that Paul was the one that was right here. That Paul is obviously who we document everything about, most things about in the New Testament. And so I just assumed that Paul, who was inspired by God, inspired by the Holy Spirit, that his opinion here and what he wanted to do in terms of not taking Mark with them, that was the right call. And maybe that is true. But if you remember the first example that we looked at, what did Paul need at the very beginning when Christians didn't trust him? They didn't want to be around him. They thought that he was still persecuting Christians and didn't trust that he was converted. What did Paul need at that time? He needed someone to vouch for him. He needed someone to say, yes, he's made all these mistakes, but I've seen the work that he's done. I've seen the teaching that he's been doing. I know that he is converted. Barnabas vouched for Paul when Paul needed it the most. And is this not a similar situation that we don't know why Mark left them in the beginning, whether it was he was homesick or whether he was just tired of the trip or some other reason. We don't necessarily know why he left. But I see this as another example of John or Mark needing someone to vouch for him, that he, it seems, realized that he had made a mistake in leaving and he's trying to join back with them to go. And Paul is not having any of it. But Barnabas, the optimist, Barnabas, the encourager, the son of encouragement, the one who sees the good in people, the one who sees the good in situations, Barnabas wanted to give him another chance. Barnabas was vouching for him in this case. And that's why I said I always thought Paul was in the right here. And maybe we should lean towards Barnabas as the right one here. Barnabas is the one that is not seeing the negative in John Mark. He's not dwelling on the fact that he left them and abandoned them maybe when they needed him in the first trip he took with them. Barnabas chooses to see the positive. He chooses to believe that Mark is ready to go with him, ready to do the work, that he's changed from whatever happened previously, and he sees the good in him and the good in this situation. And you would think that Paul, of all people, would understand that. That's why I kind of lean towards maybe Barnabas was in the right here, and that Paul should have been more like Barnabas was when Barnabas vouched for Paul in the beginning, that Paul should have done the same here for Mark. But this isn't the end of that story, and that's in Acts chapter 15, 36 through 40. Sorry for not having that up. But that's not the end of the story there with Mark. So you obviously saw there that Barnabas was the one that saw the good in Mark, was positive, was the optimist, and Paul was negative about it, didn't want to bring Mark with him. But look at what Paul says about him in 2 Timothy chapter 4. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 9 says, "Do your best to come to me soon, for Demas, in love with this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Luke alone is with me." And then here it is, "Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful to me for ministry." That Paul that did not want to take Mark at all with him, look at what he says now. He says, "Bring Mark to me because he is very useful to me for ministry." And remember, who was the one that saw the good in Mark, that saw the usefulness of Mark, that saw that he could be helpful to them on their journeys when he had previously left them? It was Barnabas. Barnabas was the optimist. Barnabas did not dwell on the negative. Barnabas did not choose to be negative about everything, did not choose to be pessimistic. He chose to see the good in people. And I'll clarify all this to say these examples aren't Barnabas being just a blind optimist, that he's not just ignoring reality and ignoring facts and ignoring truth, just being optimistic for optimistic's sake. He saw the good in people, that it was actually that they did have some good in them. When he saw the good in Paul, he knew that Paul had a future. He knew that Paul was working to be as good as he could be. When he was optimistic about what was going on in Antioch, he saw the good that was happening. When he was optimistic about Mark, he saw the potential, he saw the good in Mark. So it wasn't a blind optimism that Barnabas had. There was some legitimacy to his reasoning for being optimistic. But we just see someone that is not covered a ton in the Bible. You see a lot of Paul and Barnabas saying these things in Acts, but Paul was known as the chief speaker, and he gets a lot of the credit from us when we talk about this. But Barnabas, even if it was a small role that's recorded, we see that he was an optimist, that he was an encourager, that he saw the good in people and didn't choose to dwell on the bad all the time. He chose to believe that people could change for the better, and that people could do great things if you believed in them. And so that's really the only point that I have tonight is let's be more like Barnabas. Somewhere along the line for many of us, and I include myself in this, it became easy, or it became the normal thing to do, to be cynical, to be pessimistic, to choose to be to handle everything with sarcasm, and a biting sense of humor, and not really seeing the best in people all the time. And I think that we could learn a lot from Barnabas and how he saw the good in people. He was positive. He was optimistic. He believed that people could change for the better. And I think we could all use some of that we could all work towards being more optimistic, that we could, just like when Jesus said, forgive someone up to 70 times 7. That's kind of the same mindset that I think Barnabas had, that if someone continues to give you reasons for not believing that they're good, but they keep asking for forgiveness, they keep trying, they keep failing, that whole 70 times 7, that's the point, that we continue to believe that person can change. We continue to believe that we can change, and continue to believe that lost people have hope, if that there is good in them, if they can just hear the gospel. So that's all that I want us to learn from Barnabas tonight, is let's be more optimistic, let's be more encouraging, let's be more positive like Barnabas, not choosing to dwell on the negative, because we have to think, what kind of light are we shining? How are we being the salt of the earth if the world looks at us and sees a bunch of negative people? We need to be more positive like Barnabas, and working to see the good in people. And that's what it'll be work. It's not like it's easy I think even Barnabas, if he was here, would say it wasn't easy to be like he was. I'm sure he had to work at it. But that's something every day that we need to be working to be more like Barnabas, be more optimistic and encouraging to others. Thank you for your attention tonight. Hope this has been helpful to you, and I hope everyone has a good week. Thanks.